The cold steel of a customized Beretta pressed directly into the arrogant skull of Damien Caro, forcing him to his knees in the blood-slicked trauma room. He had just made the final, fatal mistake of his miserable life. He mocked the one woman the devil himself had sworn to protect. The neon sign outside St. Jude's underground clinic flickered a sickly shade of red against the wet pavement of Chicago's Lower West Side. Inside, the air was thick with the sterile scent of bleach masking the heavy, copper stench of fresh blood. Mirella Fontana stood at the center of Trauma Bay 2, her hands encased in blue nitrile gloves, pressing down on the shattered clavicle of a low-level cartel runner. Mirella was not the kind of woman who blended into the background. She was a woman of substance, possessing a full, plus-size figure that she carried with an uncompromising, quiet authority. Her curves were hidden beneath baggy, dark green surgical scrubs, her thick, dark hair pulled back into a severe bun that left her face entirely exposed. In a world populated by ruthless men, frail victims, and hollow-eyed addicts, Mirella was a pillar of absolute resilience. She had spent 5 years acting as the premier trauma nurse for the city's criminal underbelly, stitching up assassins, mob enforcers, and corrupt politicians without ever batting an eye or asking a single question. She was soft in all the places that the underworld was hard, yet beneath that plush exterior was a spine forged from pure titanium. She knew how these men saw her. They looked at her weight and mistook it for weakness. They looked at her round cheeks and soft jawline and assumed she was docile. They were always wrong. The heavy steel doors of the clinic flew open with a deafening crash, bouncing off the concrete walls. "Move out of the way! We have a bleeder!" A voice roared over the ambient hum of the clinic. Mirella did not flinch. She finished packing the wound of her current patient, secured it with surgical tape, and turned slowly. Storming through the corridor was Damien Caro, the volatile and arrogant heir to the Caro Syndicate, the most vicious faction of the Irish mob currently operating out of South Boston and expanding into Chicago territory. Damien was a man built on inherited wealth and unearned ego, dressed in a blood-splattered designer suit, his face flushed with cocaine and adrenaline. Beside him, 2 of his thick-necked enforcers were dragging a third man, whose leg was a mangled mess of shredded tissue and arterial spray. "Put him on table 3, Mirella instructed, her voice calm, a stark contrast to the chaos Damien had dragged into her sanctuary. She pointed to the stainless steel examination table at the far end of the room. "Elevate the leg. Apply diameter and direct pressure above the knee." Damien released his man, letting him slam onto the table and rounded on Mirella. He looked her up and down, his upper lip curling into a sneer of pure disgust. "Are you deaf?" Damien barked, stepping into her personal space. "I said we have a bleeder. Get your fat ass over here and fix him before he ruins my goddamn shoes." Mirella felt the familiar sting of the insult, but she banished the emotion before it could even register on her face. She had been called every name in the book by men who bled the same red blood as everyone else. She walked over to the supply cabinet, her movements deliberate and unhurried, grabbing a tourniquet, heavy-duty trauma shears, and a fresh stack of gauze. "I am moving at the exact speed required to save his life, Mr. Caro," Mirella replied smoothly, stepping past him. She ignored the way he crowded her, using her own solid frame to brush past his shoulder and take her position beside the wounded man. "You move like a goddamn glacier," Damien spat, pacing around the small room like a caged animal. "Look at you. They got a hippo working the graveyard shift. No wonder half the guys brought in here end up in body bags. If you laid off the donuts, maybe my guy wouldn't be bleeding out on the floor. Mirella ignored him entirely. She snapped the tourniquet high on the man's thigh, twisting it tight with a brutal, practiced efficiency that elicited a scream from the patient. She grabbed the trauma shears and cut away the blood-soaked denim, exposing the ragged entry wound. The bullet had missed the femoral artery by a fraction of an inch. "Clamp," she ordered her terrified young assistant, a medical student named Leo, who was trembling in the corner. Leo handed her the instrument. She dug into the wound, her steady hands navigating the slick tissue with absolute precision, clamping the severed vein to halt the bleeding. Damien scoffed, leaning against the sterile counter and intentionally knocking over a tray of clean instruments. They clattered to the floor, breaking the sterile field. "Oops," Damien mocked, flashing a predatory, cruel smile. "You'll just have to waddle over and pick those up later, won't you, sweetheart? God, it sickens me that my father pays a premium for this place, and we get some chubby, incompetent, broad-playing doctor." Mirella secured the clamp and began packing the wound with hemostatic gauze. Her heart beat a slow, steady rhythm. She refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Her silence, however, only seemed to infuriate the mobster further. He hated that he could not intimidate her. He hated that this plus-size nurse in blood-stained scrubs held more composure in her little finger than he did in his entire body. He reached out, his hand snapping forward to grip her upper arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "When I talk to you, you answer me, you fat cow," Damien hissed, his breath hot and smelling of cheap whiskey and expensive tobacco. Before Mirella could swat his hand away, the heavy steel doors at the front of the clinic opened again. This time, there was no crash. There was no shouting. There was only the deliberate, rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. The entire atmosphere in the clinic shifted instantly. The ambient temperature seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Even Damien's enforcers, who had been loudly demanding pain meds, fell completely silent, their hands instinctively dropping toward the weapons holstered under their jackets. Through the entrance walked Franco Conti. Franco was the boss of the Conti Syndicate, the reigning apex predator of the Chicago Cosa Nostra. He was a man of terrifying stillness, possessing the kind of power that did not require screaming or posturing. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that draped flawlessly over his broad, heavily muscled frame. His dark, sharp eyes swept the room, cataloguing every detail in a fraction of a second. The bleeding man on the table, the overturned medical tray, Damien Caro. And finally, Damien's hand gripped tightly around Mirella's arm. Franco's eyes locked onto that hand. A shadow, dark and absolute, crossed his handsome, angular face. To the rest of the underworld, Mirella Fontana was just the night nurse at a shadow clinic. But to Franco Conti, she was an obsession. 2 years ago, Franco had been dragged into this very clinic with 3 bullets in his chest, betrayed by his own capo. It was Mirella who had refused to let him die. For 12 hours, she had worked on him, her soft, steady hands bringing him back from the brink of hell. When he woke up, the first thing he saw was her face, exhausted, beautiful, and completely fearless. Since that night, Franco had silently placed a shield of absolute protection over her. He funneled untraceable millions into St. Jude's just to ensure she had the best equipment. He had men watching her apartment, her car, and her commute. He worshipped the ground she walked on, captivated by her strength, her intelligence, and her lush, beautiful body that he spent countless sleepless nights dreaming about. And now, a mid-level Irish thug was putting his hands on her. "Take your hand off her," Franco said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, resonant baritone that carried a lethal, gravelly edge. It was the tone of a man who did not issue warnings, only death sentences. Damien turned, his bloodshot eyes widening slightly as he recognized the head of the Italian syndicate. The fragile truce between the Irish and the Italians was the only thing keeping the streets of Chicago from running red with blood. Damien, bloated with his own arrogance, slowly released Mirella's arm, but he did not back down. Instead, he flashed a wide, insolent grin, trying to project a camaraderie that did not exist. "Franco Conti," Damien drawled, wiping a speck of blood from his lapel. "To what do we owe the pleasure? Didn't expect to see the boss of the Italians slumming it in a chop shop on a Tuesday night." Franco ignored the question. He walked slowly across the trauma bay, the click of his leather shoes echoing like a metronome, counting down the last seconds of Damien's life. He bypassed the enforcers entirely, walking straight toward Mirella. His dark eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at her, silently checking her for injuries. Mirella met his gaze, feeling the familiar, intense jolt in her chest that she always felt when Franco was near. She gave him a microscopic nod, signaling she was okay, but she could see the violence simmering just beneath his perfectly tailored exterior. "I was in the neighborhood," Franco said, his gaze shifting from Mirella to the overturned tray of sterile instruments on the floor. "You seem to be making a mess in my clinic, Damien." "Your clinic?" Damien laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Look, Franco, no disrespect, but my men are bleeding, and the help here is severely lacking. I'm just trying to motivate the staff." Damien stepped closer to Franco, lowering his voice conspiratorially, as if he were speaking to an equal in a boys' club. "I mean, look at her," Damien continued, gesturing lazily toward Mirella with his thumb. "I don't know who does the hiring here, but they need to do a better job. She's so fat she can barely fit between the tables. I told her to hurry up, and she just stood there. You let these heavy, useless broads run the show, it makes the whole operation look weak. If she were mine, I'd put a bullet in her just for being an eyesore." The silence that followed Damien's words was so profound, it felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Mirella froze, her hands gripping the edge of the stainless steel table. She had endured cruelty before, but the sheer, venomous hatred in Damien's voice was jarring. She braced herself, instinctively looking down at the tiled floor, preparing to weather the storm of humiliation. But the storm did not fall on her. Franco did not blink. He did not shout. He moved with a sudden, explosive velocity that defied his size. Before Damien could even draw his next breath, Franco's hand shot forward, wrapping around Damien's throat like a steel vice. He slammed the Irish mobster backward, sent Hunter backward, crashing him into the concrete wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Damien's two enforcers shouted, their hands flying to their waistbands, but before their weapons could clear their holsters, the clinic doors burst open again. 6 of Franco's most lethal soldiers, clad in black, flooded the room. Within 3 seconds, 6 assault rifles were leveled at the heads of the Irish thugs. The message was clear: move and die. Damien gasped, his hands clawing uselessly at Franco's wrist. His feet dangled an inch off the floor, his face turning a mottled shade of purple as Franco crushed his windpipe. Franco leaned in close, his face mere inches from Damien's terrified eyes. With his free hand, Franco reached inside his jacket, drawing a customized matte black Beretta. The sound of the hammer clicking back was the loudest noise in the world. Franco pressed the cold steel barrel directly into the center of Damien's forehead. "You breathed her air," Franco whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, demonic rage. "You came into her sanctuary. You threw your dirty money at her. You touched her arm. And then you insulted the woman I love. Mirella's breath hitched. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide as she stared at Franco's broad back. The woman I love. The words echoed in her mind, impossible and yet hanging in the air with absolute finality. Damien made a pathetic, choking sound, his eyes rolling wildly toward the barrel of the gun. He tried to speak, to beg, to remind Franco of the syndicate treaties, but the iron grip on his throat allowed no air to pass. Franco kept the gun pressed so hard against Damien's skull that a thin trickle of blood began to seep from the broken skin, running down the bridge of the mobster's nose. You look at her and you see a target for your pathetic insecurities, Franco continued, his voice cold and rhythmic. I look at her, and I see a queen. I see a woman whose hands have saved more lives than your entire worthless bloodline has ever taken. I see a woman whose body is perfect. Every inch of her. She is a goddess among filthy, wretched animals like you. Franco adjusted his grip, bringing Damien's face even closer. The smell of fear rolling off the Irish air was intoxicating. Your father will go to war over this, Damien finally managed to squeak out, his voice a broken, raspy wheeze as Franco momentarily loosened his grip just enough to let him speak. You kill me. The treaty is dead. The outfit will bleed. Franco smiled. It was not a happy expression. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Let them bleed, Franco said, his tone utterly indifferent to the prospect of a massive mob war. I will burn Chicago to the foundation. I will slaughter every breathing member of the Caro Syndicate. I will salt the earth where your father's house stands. I would gladly start World War III before I let a miserable, insignificant insect like you disrespect Mirella and walk out of this room with his life. Franco lowered his voice to a deadly whisper. Now, get on your knees. Franco released Damien's throat. The mobster collapsed to the floor, gasping frantically for air, clutching his bruised neck. He looked up, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by the naked, weeping terror of a man staring death in the face. Apologize to her, Franco ordered, pointing the Beretta down at Damien's face. Damien crawled, literally dragging himself across the blood-slicked floor until he was at the toes of Mirella's scuffed medical clogs. He didn't look like a tough mob boss anymore. He looked like a pathetic, broken child. I'm sorry, Damien sobbed, staring at the floor, unable to look Mirella in the eye. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please. Franco stepped up beside Mirella. He did not look at the groveling man at their feet. He looked only at her. His dark, ruthless eyes softened, shedding the monster, and revealing the man who had secretly worshipped her for 2 years. Is his apology enough for you, Mia Regina? Franco asked softly, his thumb gently brushing the fabric of her sleeve where Damien had grabbed her. Or would you like me to paint the wall with his brains? The choice is yours. Only yours. Mirella stared down at the trembling figure of Damien Caro, the heir to the Irish syndicate, a man who had walked into her trauma bay, acting as if he owned the very air she breathed, was now a pathetic, weeping heap on the bloody tiles. The heavy silence of the clinic was broken only by his ragged, desperate breathing and the rhythmic drip of blood from the examination table where his wounded soldier still lay. She looked from Damien to Franco. The boss of the Chicago Cosa Nostra stood perfectly still, his massive frame radiating an almost demonic aura of violence. The customized Beretta was still locked in his grip, its muzzle angled downward, waiting for her command. Franco was not bluffing. Mirella had spent enough time patching up the casualties of the underworld to know the look of a man fully prepared to take a life. If she gave the word, Franco would pull the trigger, painting the sterile walls of her clinic with Damien's blood, and he would sleep soundly that night. He was offering her the ultimate power in their brutal world, the power of life and death. Mirella took a slow, deep breath, her broad chest rising and falling as she processed the surreal reality of the moment. For years, she had insulated herself from the politics of the syndicates. She was a healer, a neutral party who asked no questions and judged no sins. She had absorbed the insults about her weight, her appearance, and her gender, burying them beneath a thick armor of professional stoicism. But Franco had just shattered that armor. He had elevated her above the violence, declaring her a queen before the most dangerous men in the city. She looked back down at Damien. He flinched under her gaze, his tear-streaked face pressing closer to the scuffed toes of her surgical clogs. "I am a trauma nurse, Mr. Caro," Mirella began, her voice remarkably steady, echoing clearly across the silent room. "I spend my nights pulling bullets out of men who believe they are untouchable. I see what you all look like when the adrenaline wears off and the bleeding won't stop. You walk around this city thinking you are gods because you carry guns and inherited a name. But on my tables, you are all exactly the same. Just fragile, easily broken flesh and bone." Damien squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a pitiful whimper as Franco shifted his stance, the leather of his custom shoes creaking menacingly. "You looked at my size and assumed I was weak," Mirella continued, her tone devoid of anger, replacing it with a cold, absolute authority. "You looked at my curves and decided I was incompetent. But it is my steady hands that save your men while you stand in the corner throwing tantrums like a spoiled child. I do not take lives, Mr. Caro. I preserve them, even worthless ones." Mirella shifted her gaze to Franco. The dark, lethal storm in his eyes was still raging, but as he met her gaze, a profound, undeniable reverence washed over his features. He was waiting for her verdict. "I don't want his blood in my clinic, Franco," she said softly. "It's already hard enough to get the grout clean." A collective, silent breath of relief seemed to pass through the surviving Irish enforcers. Damien let out a loud, shuddering sob, his forehead resting against the cold floor. But Mirella was not finished. "However," Mirella said, her voice dropping a fraction, cutting through the relief like a scalpel, "St. Jude's relies on anonymous donations to keep its doors open to the people of the lower West Side. The actual innocent people, not just syndicate runners. Since Mr. Caro was so dissatisfied with my speed and the quality of my medical supplies, I think it is only fair that the Caro Syndicate single-handedly funds this clinic for the next 10 years. Franco let out a low, dark chuckle. It was a terrifying sound that made the hairs on the back of Damien's neck stand up. "Did you hear the lady, Damien?" Franco asked, his gravelly voice dripping with lethal amusement. $5 million. Transferred into the clinic's offshore charity accounts by midnight tomorrow. If the money is 1 penny short or 1 minute late, I will personally visit your father's estate and feed him your heart." "I'll pay it," Damien choked out, scrambling slightly backward, but keeping his head bowed. "I swear to God, I'll pay it. Every cent. Just let me leave." "Get your trash out of my sight," Franco commanded, finally lowering the Beretta and tucking it smoothly back into the shoulder holster beneath his charcoal jacket. And Damien. The Irish air froze. Terrified to even breathe, If I ever hear that you spoke her name again, if I ever find out you drove within a 5-mile radius of this building, or if you ever look at another woman and think you have the right to judge her worth," Franco said, his voice dropping to a demonic whisper, "I will not make it quick. You will pray for a bullet." Damien nodded frantically. His 2 enforcers, still held at gunpoint by Franco's soldiers, slowly lowered their hands. Moving with panicked urgency, they grabbed their wounded comrade off the examination table, hauling him over their shoulders, completely abandoning the sterile dressing Mirella had just applied. They dragged Damien to his feet and practically carried him out the door, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of the Italian boss. Franco gestured with 2 fingers. His 6 soldiers lowered their assault rifles and silently backed out of the trauma bay, the heavy steel doors swinging shut behind them. Leo, the terrified medical student, took one look at Franco and sprinted toward the back supply room, locking the door behind him. Suddenly, the clinic was entirely empty. The chaos of the last 10 minutes evaporated, leaving behind only the harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of copper, and the deafening silence of the aftermath. Mirella stood by the stainless steel counter, staring at the empty doorway. Her adrenaline, which had kept her perfectly composed during the confrontation, finally began to crash. Her hands, which could stitch an artery without a millimeter of tremor, suddenly felt heavy and numb. She gripped the edge of the counter, bowing her head as the sheer magnitude of what had just happened washed over her. Franco Conti had just risked a full-scale mafia war. For her, the sharp click of Franco's leather shoes broke the silence as he crossed the trauma bay. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who had finally reached the end of a long, exhausting journey. He stopped inches away from Mirella, his massive frame casting a warm, protective shadow over her. "Mirella," Franco said softly. His voice was entirely different now. The gravelly, lethal edge was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth that resonated directly in her chest. She slowly lifted her head. Franco was looking at her right arm, his dark eyes locking onto the exact spot where Damien's fingers had dug into her flesh. Slowly, carefully, as if he were approaching a fragile work of art, Franco reached out. He did not grab her. He let his large, calloused fingertips gently brush against the dark green fabric of her surgical scrubs. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mirella swallowed hard, her throat dry. She gave a small nod. Franco gently rolled up the short sleeve of her scrub top, exposing her plush, soft upper arm. A faint, angry red mark was already beginning to form in the shape of Damien's grip. Franco's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek as a flash of residual violence crossed his eyes. "I should have killed him the second he walked through that door," Franco murmured, his thumb lightly tracing the perimeter of the reddened skin, careful not to press on the bruise. "He touched you. He put his filthy hands on you, and I wasn't fast enough." Mirella looked up at his face. The ruthless Mafia Boss, the apex predator of the Chicago underworld, was staring at a minor bruise on her arm, as if it were a mortal wound. "Franco," Mirella said, her voice trembling slightly. "What did you just do? You humiliated the heir to the Caro Syndicate. You extorted them." "The treaty." "To hell with the treaty," Franco interrupted, his gaze snapping up to meet hers. His eyes were intensely dark, swirling with an obsession so deep it took her breath away. "There is no treaty. There is no syndicate. There is no city without you, Mirella." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, completely enveloping her in his scent of expensive cologne, dark espresso, and faint gunpowder. For 2 years, Franco confessed, his voice thick with emotion. I have lived in the shadows of this clinic. I bought the building across the street just so I could put a security detail on the roof to watch your car. I bribed the city planners to keep the street lights on this block burning brighter than the rest of the neighborhood, so you would never have to walk in the dark. Every time a rival crew got too close to this neighborhood, I had them eradicated. Mirella's eyes widened. She had always felt a strange, invisible shield around her since the night she saved him. But she had never dared to imagine the absolute magnitude of his devotion. She thought she was just a civilian he respected. She never imagined she was the center of his universe. "Why?" she whispered, a tear finally breaking free and tracking down her round cheek. "I am just a nurse, Franco. I am not a mob princess. I am not one of those glamorous, rail-thin supermodels that hang off the arms of men like you. I'm just me." Franco's hands moved from her arm, his large palms coming up to cup her face. His touch was incredibly gentle, reverent, holding her cheeks as his thumbs softly wiped away her tear. "Do not ever repeat the lies that pathetic men have fed you," Franco said fiercely, his eyes locking onto hers with an unwavering intensity. "Look at me, Mirella. Look at me and listen to what I am saying." She looked up, drowning in the absolute sincerity of his gaze. "They look at your softness, and they are too stupid to see the titanium beneath it," Franco whispered, his thumbs tracing the soft curve of her jawline. "They look at your curves, and they do not realize they are looking at a goddess. You are lush, you are brilliant, and you are fearless. The night you pulled those bullets out of my chest, I looked up from the table and saw an angel entirely comfortable in hell. You are perfect. Every single inch of you is a masterpiece that I have spent 2 years dreaming about." Mirella's breath hitched. A lifetime of insecurities, of being told she was too big, too loud, too much to be truly loved, crumbled under the sheer weight of Franco's confession. He did not love her in spite of her plus-size figure. He worshipped her because of it. He saw her softness as her ultimate strength, the perfect counterweight to the dark, violent world he inhabited. "You called me your queen," Mirella whispered, her hands slowly coming up to rest against his broad, solid chest. She could feel the heavy, rapid beating of his heart beneath his tailored suit. "Because you are," Franco replied, his gaze dropping to her lips. "And it is time I finally took my place beside you. If you will have me." Mirella did not hesitate. The professional shield she had worn for 5 long years completely shattered. She slid her hands up past his chest, her fingers weaving into his dark hair, and pulled him down to her. Franco captured her lips with a desperate, starving intensity. The kiss was a collision of 2 vastly different worlds, her healing light and his beautiful darkness. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, pulling her full, soft curves flush against his hard, muscular body. He held her as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, his kiss deep, possessive, and completely uncompromising. Mirella melted into his embrace, her hands gripping his shoulders, feeling an overwhelming sense of absolute safety. In his arms, she was not the chubby graveyard nurse. She was the undisputed ruler of his heart. When they finally broke apart, Franco rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing heavily. He kept his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, refusing to let any distance form between them. "You are done working the graveyard shift," Franco murmured, a possessive smile playing on his lips. "Tomorrow, I am buying this clinic. You will be the chief of trauma, and you will work in the daylight. And if any man ever speaks to you with anything less than absolute worship, I will bury him under the foundation." Mirella laughed, a rich, melodic sound that echoed through the bloody, sterile room. It was the sound of a woman who had finally stepped into her true power. She looked up at the ruthless Mafia Boss, her heart overflowing with a dark, thrilling romance. "You are a monster, Franco Conti," she whispered playfully, trailing a finger down the lapel of his suit. Franco smiled, a genuine, blinding expression that he reserved only for her. He leaned in to kiss her one more time, his voice a low, gravelly promise against her lips. "Yes, Mia Regina, but I am your monster, and the world belongs to you." Did this intense mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Franco defend his plus-size queen and put Damien in his place, hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Comment below to tell us what you think of Mirella's hidden strength and Franco's dark, unwavering devotion. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more gripping, gritty underworld tales. We have plenty more thrilling romances coming your way.